We are starting by summarizing the order of the preference. According to Rabbi Meir, again, our Mishnah says a neder is a no-no. Neder is bad. Nedava is good. So our Mishnah says neder is bad and nedava is good. Rabbi Meir says that the order is don't take a neder, take a neder and pay, take a neder and don't pay. It means the best thing is not take a neder. Second best, if you got to take a neder, you just have that Yetzirah, you got to take it. So take it and pay. And the worst thing would be to take a neder and not pay. And Rabbi Yehuda says the best thing to actually do is to take a neder and pay. Doing it and paying would be better than not doing it at all. But obviously he agrees the worst thing would be to take it and not pay. So the question becomes, if the Mishnah says neder are bad, a neder is bad, so how can Rabbi Yehuda say that the best thing to do is take a neder and pay? I would think he would say, don't take a neder. It would be better than taking a neder and paying. So afilutim, Rabbi Yehuda, so the Gemara says, you can explain our Mishnah which says neder is a no-no, neder is bad, even like Rabbi Yehuda on the top of Yud Amud Aleph Kiyam, Rabbi Yehuda ben Nedava. Rabbi Yehuda is talking about ben Nedava. The best thing to do is nedava u'mishalem. Ben neder lo amar. But by neder he agrees it's better not to take a neder than to take a neder and pay it up. V'aktani told me said no der mekayim, but he says l'maisa that you should take a neder u'mekayim. It tani no dev u'mekayim. He says you should take a nedava and you should fulfill it. You should not take a neder and fulfill it. Fine. So that's how we work out. Neder is bad, nedava is good. So now the Gemara is going to ask, Maishna no der delo. So what's wrong with taking a neder? Now what's a neder? A neder, again, just to review, is I hereby undertake to bring a korban, to bring an offering. I hereby undertake to bring an offering, which means that the animal may die, the animal may get lost, but at the end of the day I still need to bring another animal because I undertook to bring an offering. A nedava, this animal is consecrated as an offering if this animal dies or gets lost, so I no longer have to bring an offering because this animal, and only this animal, was consecrated as an offering. So the Gemara says, Maishna no der delo. Why is it a problem to take a neder that I hereby undertake to bring an offering? Dilma asa asiba lide takala. You're going to come to a takala. You're going to have a problem. What's going to be the problem? What's going to be the stumbling block? Because if it dies or gets lost, you'll need to bring another one, and you won't. Nedava nami dilma asi lide takala. If I say this animal I'm going to bring, maybe you're going to have a takala. What's the takala? Well, again, if it dies or gets lost, it's not your problem. So what's the takala? The takala is that you have to bring the korban within 3 regalim. When you say you're going to bring in a nedava to bring this korban, it needs to be within 3 regalim. So if you're before Sukkot, you need to bring it as a machlokes. If it always starts at Pesach, I believe, or if it starts whichever holiday you're before. But let's say it's before Sukkot, so you have until Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuos. By the time Shavuos passes, you've been over this isser of waiting. So you shouldn't take a nedava either, because you might come to be over this isser of waiting 3 regalim. Rabbi Yehuda l'tamei d'amar. So how can Rabbi Yehuda say that a nedava is good? If there's this takala that it could come to, maybe you're better off not taking nedavas. Rabbi Yehuda l'tamei. Rabbi Yehuda was going according to his own opinion, and he says that it's good to take nedavas, but it's good to take nedavas only when you follow the following. Only when you follow the following protocol. De'amar adam mevi kavasto le'azara u'magdisha v'someich aleha v'shochta. So what do? You bring your animal to the Azar, to the Beis HaMikdash, you makdish it right there, you do smicha on it right there, and you shecht it right on the spot. So there's not going to be any takala, there's not going to be any stumbling blocks, any problems, because we're only worried if you're going to say, I'm going to bring this animal, and then 3 regalim are going to pass. But if you literally say, I'm going to bring this animal, when you're standing in the Beis HaMikdash, and you're going to bring it in 5 minutes from now, so we're not worried that something's going to happen between the time. What?
Like Betilen.
So we're going to get to that in a second.
Tinach
nedava de korbanos, nedava de nazirus ma'ika lamemar. So tinach nedava de korbanos. So the nedava of a korbanos, this works. Again, when we say that you can make a nedava, so that'll work to say by nedava korbanos, I'm going to do it right when I'm in the Beis HaMikdash, and I'm going to bring it right away. Nedava de nazirus ma'ika lamemar. But why should it be okay? Why should it be virtuous to take a nedava to become a nazir? Over there's a problem because you might mess up the nazirus. You might end up and become tamei during the 30 days. You might not finish the term. So I understand how you can give me a case where it's good to take a nedava to bring a korban. If you're literally right there in the Beis HaMikdash, you can't really mess up. It's foolproof. But how can you tell me that there's a case where you're going to become a nazir and it's okay and it's good to take a nedava to become a nazir? Seemingly you're leaving yourself up for a takala. You're leaving yourself up to be trapped and to mess up. So he says, Rabbi Yehuda l'tamei. Rabbi Yehuda goes according to his opinion. He says, when I said it's good to take a nedava of Nazirus. What did I mean? Titania, there's a special type of Nazirus nedava. What does it mean? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Chasidim Harishonim hayu misavin lahabi korban chatas. I can't relate, but the Chasidim Harishonim used to want to bring a korban chatas. They had a little bit of a problem. They never sinned. And they really want to bring a korban chatas. But what do you do if you never sin and you want to bring a korban chatas? So what do you do? Maybe takala al yedayim. They want to bring a korban chatas, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu never brought any sin through them, and therefore they didn't know what to do because they couldn't bring a korban chatas. So what did they do? Ma'ayu osin omdinu misnadvin nazirus lamakum kadesh yischayev korban chatas lamakum. Fascinating. What does a nazir bring at the end of his time? At the end of time, he needs to bring a korban chatas, and there's a whole discussion why he needs to bring a sin offering at the end of the nazirus. But he needs to bring a korban chatas. So when I say that an nedava is a nedava that's a virtuous nedava because you'll be able to fulfill it right away. What does that mean? A nedava is a virtuous nedava in this case, where you're doing it, where you're becoming a nazir, because you have this yetzer hara that you want to bring a korban chatas, and unfortunately you never sin in your life. So in that case, if you become a nazir so that you could bring a korban chatas, that's considered to be a virtuous nedava. Okay? If anybody here can relate to that shkoyach. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon says, Lo nidro benazir. Rabbi Shimon says that the Chasidim Harishonim never even did this. They never took an nedava naziros even to bring a korban chatas, because that's not virtuous, even to bring a korban chatas. Why? El arotzi lavi ola. What did they do when they want to bring an ola misnadeva mevi? They would make an nedava to bring an ola and bring it. Shlamim misnadeva mevi. Toda verba mine lachma, the toda with the 4 types of bread together with it. Misnadeva mevi. Abba ben naziros lo hisnavdu. But by a naziros, they never made a nedava for naziros. So you said that it's considered to be a virtuous nedava when you take a nedava for naziros, when you're taking the nedava because you dafka want to be able to bring a korban chatas, which you can never bring otherwise because you never sin, like the Chasidim Harishonim. He's saying no. Even they didn't do that, because even that type of naziros, even that type of nedava is not a virtuous nedava. Why? V'ben naziros lo hisnavu. They didn't do that. Why? Kadesh lo yikru chotin. Because at the end of the day, you're called a choteh when you bring that thing. Shneimar v'chiper alav me'asher chatal nefesh. It says that you're going to be mechaper, the korban chatas that a nazir brings is because he sinned. So they wouldn't take an nedava to bring a korban chatas at the end of the naziris, because it's not just, it's a nice thing to bring a korban chatas. You're considered to be a sinner. So they weren't going to go ahead and bring it at the expense of being called a sinner. Amar Abai. Abai says, Shimon HaTzadik, for Rabbi Shimon, for Rabbi Elazar HaKfar, Kulon Shita Achas Hein de Nazir Chote Have. So they all agree, again, this is Rabbi Shimon's opinion, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're not a Chote. You're just bringing a korban chatas, but you're not a Chote. According to Shimon, Rabbi Shimon, you're actually a Chote. That's why they didn't do it. So Shimon HaTzadik, who you had on the last DAF, and Rabbi Shimon here, for Rabbi Elazar HaKfar, as we'll see in a second, they all say that a Nazir is a Chote. Shimon HaTzadik, for Rabbi Shimon HaDe'amran, what you just said. That he said that the Chasidim Rishonim didn't bring it because Lamaisa they're going to be called a Chote. Rabbi Elazar HaKfar Rebbe, where do we see that Rabbi Elazar HaKfar Rebbe says that a Nazir is a Chote? Detanya, Rabbi Elazar HaKfar Rebbe Omer v'chiper alav me'asher chatal nafesh, that the korban chatas that a Nazir brings is going to atone for the fact that he sinned. What sin did he do? V'chi be'ezo nefesh chadzeh. The chait that a Nazir did is that he sinned against himself by abstaining from wine. He was distressed since he couldn't drink wine. And he makes a kal v'chomer from here. If a Nazir who goes ahead and is distressed because he can't drink wine and he's called a chote for distressing himself, if somebody is mitzar himself from everything in the world, and the Gemara seems to be talking about food, if you fast, then you're definitely a chote. Mikan kol ayoshe betanis nikra chote. From here we see anybody who fasts is called a chote. It's not talking about a fast like a public fast, or a fast for a dream, or a fast for tshuva. A fast that you just fast because, okay, I'm not in the mood to eat. Stam, I want to punish myself for whatever reason, right? There are religions that believe you should just punish yourself. Again, maybe that would be okay because you're fasting for a tshuva.
That's only if he's weak.
It's only if he's weak. What do you mean if he's weak?
Constitution. If he can take the fast, he's allowed to
do it. No reason.
Again, so the Gemara is saying that if there's no reason, even if you could take it, if there's no reason for it, then you're a chote.
You're flicking yourself.
Again, if you're doing it for, I don't know what that means, but if you're doing it for a legitimate reason, that's fine. If you're just doing it stam because you want to be fasting, you're a chote. Okay. V'hadein kra ben nazir tamei ksiv. So Gemara, that's a good question. He says, very nice, we're talking about this pasuk, and we're talking about how every nazir is a chote, and you're explaining that according to Rabbi Elazar HaKfar, a nazir is a chote because at the end of the day, he goes ahead and needs to bring korban chatas because he was mitzar himself. But l'maisa, the pasuk which says v'chiper, that it's going to be an atonement, at the end of the day, the pasuk is talking about a nazir who becomes tamei. during his Nazirus. So how can you explain it? It sounds like you're saying every Nazir is a sinner. According to what you're explaining, he's a sinner because he's mitzar atzmo min hayayim, because he's making himself suffer. But at the end of the day, this pasuk seems to be talking about only a Nazir who goes ahead and actually becomes tamei. It sounds like if a Nazir makes it through his Nazirah, so he's not a sinner. The Gemara says no. Mishum deshana b'cheithu. He's called a sinner because he did 2 chataim. Every Nazir is a sinner for sinning in the first place. Why is he sinning? Again, as we explained, according to at least Rabbi Lazar Kfar Rabbi Omer, by the fact that he went ahead and became a Nazir and made himself suffer, that was one sin. And when it says if this guy is a sinner, so this guy who breaks his Nazirus, who becomes tamei, who becomes impure during the Nazirus, he's a double sinner. He went ahead and he sinned twice. A, by becoming a Nazir, and B, by going ahead and becoming tamei during his Nazirus. Masnisan. Okay, I'm starting to like NEDARIM. Masnisan. Ha'omer, if a person says, konam, konach, konas. Again, you can either say, I want to bring a korban. You could say cherem. You could say nazir. You can make a shvua. Now we're going to talk about not the actual word, but now you're using a kinoi. You're using a word that's similar to the actual word. Not that it sounds exactly the same, even though some of them do. But instead of saying, I want to bring a korban, I want to do cherem, I want to become a nazir, you say one of these words. The question is, are one of these words, do they count, and are you therefore now chayav to bring a korban? Are you chayav to have this item dedicated to the Mishkan? Are you now a nazir? And have you just taken a shua? So ha'omer konam, konach, konas, Haraelu kinuyin the korban. Those are all different ways of saying that you want to bring this as a korban, and that this thing should be like a korban to me. Cherech, cherech, cherech. Haraelu kinuyin lecherem. Those are different ways of saying that this thing should be cherem, dedicated to the mikdash. Nazik, naziach, paziach. Haraelu kinuyin lenazirus. Those are different ways of saying I'm going to become a nazir. Shvusa, shkuka, noder b'mohi. What's mohi? Mohi is Moshe Rabbeinu taking a shvua by Moshe. Haraelu kinuyin l'shvua. Those are ways of making a shvua. Fine. Says the Gemara. Itmar. The Gemara says kinuyin. These secondary ways of saying these things, I don't want to call them nicknames, but these nicknames for these swears. Rabbi Yochanan amar lashon umosein. So the question is, what are these kinuyin? Like, what kinds of words are they? Are these made-up words or are these actual words? So Rabbi Yochanan says these are lashon umos. These are words that are used in other languages. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish amar, Reish Lakish says no. These are lashon shebadlam chacham lios no debo. These are special words that the chachamim created. If you want to take a neder without using the regular word, these are special code words that you can take. What would be the nafkamina, the practical difference, whether it's a word that's used in another language or a word that the chachamim made up? So seemingly, if it's a word that the chachamim made up, you'd be able to say it at any point, anywhere in the world. If it's specifically a word that's used in other languages, one can argue that that word would only work to be a neder, to be a shvua, to be a cherem, to be a korban. It would only work in the place where it actually means what we're saying it means. But if you would go to China and you'd use a word that's a American word and nobody speaks Chinese and nobody speaks American there, even though it's not true, but if theoretically you take an American word that means neder and you would say it in China, so it wouldn't work. But if the American word which means neder was shabadu chachamim, that the chachamim created, so I could say it in China, I could say it here, I could say it in Australia, I could say it in Israel, and it's going to work. That would be one practical nafkamina. So the Gemara says, V'cheinu omer, we have a proof that the word badu means created, B'chodesh asher bada miliba, the chodesh that he created, and therefore, according to Reish Lakish, these are lishonos, these are words that the chachamim created. It's one thing if you say that this is the lashon, these are the words that are used in other languages, like Rabbi Yochanan, and that's why it's going to work to take on a neder, to take on a shvua, to take on cherem, to take on a korban. But if it's words that the Chachamim created, so why did the Chachamim have to create these words? If you want to take a neder, say neder. You want to make a korban, say korban. You want to take cherem, you say cherem. You want to take a shvua, say shvua. Why do they have to have these other words that you can say, these code words that you can say to mean one of the other words? So the Gemara says, the lo lema korban. Because we don't want you saying korban. We don't necessarily want you saying cherem. We don't want you saying nazirus. We don't want you saying shua. Why? Very interesting. The lema korban. What's wrong with saying the word korban? Dilma amar korban lashem. There's a pasuk in the Torah that says korban lashem numerous times. We don't want you saying this is a korban lashem. What's wrong with saying it's korban lashem? The lema korban lashem. Dilma amar lashem v'lo amar korban. Right? the famous thing: you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't talk because it's going to lead to mixed dancing, right? So the same thing over here. I forgot him on tape. I'm sorry. I forgot him in the second chair. Okay. But in general, we understand what we're saying here, that we're worried that if you start doing this, so then you're going to do that. So we're saying over here that really you could say Korban. But we don't want you to say Korban, because if you say Korban, you're going to say Korban Lashem. What's wrong if you say Korban Lashem? Once you start saying Korban Lashem, you're just going to say La Hashem. Dilma Amar Lashem, V'lo Amar Korban. V'kamafik Shem Shemayim Levatala. You're going to take Shem Shemayim Levatala. Therefore, we have these Kinuyim, because if you say the Kinuyim for Korban, if you say one of these words that are instead of Korban, if you say Konam, Konach, Konas, you're not going to say Konas Hashem. You're not going to come to say La Hashem without Konas. And at the end of the day, you won't have a problem with taking Shem Shemayim Levatala, to desecrating the name of God in vain. Vitanya, and that's why they created these names. Vitanya, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Minayin Shelo Yomer Adam La Hashem Ola, La Hashem Mincha, La Hashem Toda, La Hashem Shalom. Where do we see that you shouldn't say La Hashem Ola? This Ola is for Hashem. La Hashem Mincha, La Hashem Toda, La Hashem Shalom. Where do you see that you shouldn't say this with La Hashem first? Talmud Loimar, because the Torah says Korban La Hashem, as we just said. V'kal v'chomer, we just said that we're afraid to say even the word Korban, because the pasuk says Korban La Hashem, and you're going to end up saying La Hashem by itself. V'kal v'chomer. Umaz Eshelo Niskavin El Hasker Shem Shamayim Ala Korban. This one who wanted to say Shem Shamayim Ala Korban, he still shouldn't say Korban La Hashem. Amr Torah Korban Lashem Levatala Alachas Kama Kama. For sure, if it's just Levatala La Hashem Ola, La Hashem Mincha, La Hashem Chatas, La Hashem Toda, whatever. So for sure, that's going to be a problem. It sounds like the Gemara is saying it's a problem even to say it, even if you're not going to say La Hashem by itself. Even just to say La Hashem Mincha, La Hashem Toda, La Hashem Shlamim would be Shem Shamayim Levatala. Very interesting. Okay. Leima Kitanai. So let's say that this machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that these code words are based on the fact that it's the words that are used in other languages, and Reish Lakish, who says that these words are words that the Chaim made up, let's say that this is the same machlokas between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai omrim kinoi kinuyin asurin, that when you have not just code words now we're getting very serious, now we're going the code of the code words. You really don't want to say the word, you don't even want to say the code word, you want to say the derivative of the code word itself. Okay, I never had a Yetzer Hara to have to say the code of the code word, but obviously people want to say the code of the code word. So you don't want to say the word, you don't want to say the code, you want to say the code of the code word. So Beit Shammai says asurin. What does that mean, asur? Now you have to remember, when you're dealing with NEDARIM and Nedavos, asur doesn't mean it's asur to say the word. Asur means if you say the word is valid. And it makes your neder chal, and that object becomes asur to you. So kinoi kinuyin asurin, if you say the kinoi of a kinoi, the derivative of the derivative, it's going to be a valid neder, or shvua, or korban, or chayrim. Uveselamim kinoi kinuyin mutarin. It's mutter because you didn't do anything. My la, so the Gemara is going to explain, and the Gemara is going to assume. Mandi Amar Kinoi Kinuyin Asurin Beit Shammai, who says that when you use the derivative of the derivative, it's actually going to chal, it's going to take effect. Kisavar, because he holds Kinuyin Lashon Umosein. He holds that Kinoi Kinuyin are Lashon Umos. He seems to be saying that what? That Kinuyin are Lashon Umos Ha'olam, and therefore any word that's used by people, even if it's the derivative, if it's the code word, or it's the code of the code word connected to the code word, if it's used by people, then it's going to be fine. And the one who says it's mutter Beis Hillel, that it's not going to be valid, so they hold like Reish Lakish, that kinuyin are lashon shabadulam chachamim, that the kinuyin, the code words, are words that the rabbis made up, and only those words which the rabbi made up are going to work, and the words that sound similar to the words that the rabbi made up are not going to work. Lo. Gemara says no. Dekule alma kinuyin lashon umosein. No. Everybody agrees that kinuyin are the words that are used in other languages. If it's the words that are used in other languages, so then seemingly, as we said, you should hold like Beit Shammai that it should work as long as it's used by other languages. Ubeit Shammai savri bahani nami mishtai umos. We're saying no, lemaisa, it's a machlokas and mitzias. Do the other languages use kinoi kinuyin or not? According to Beit Shammai, they use kinoi kinuyin. They actually use these words, code words, the codes of the code words, the derivative of the derivatives they use in order to say cherem, shvu, etc., and therefore it'll work. I agree that these words are based on the words that are used in the world, but lemaisa, people don't talk like that, and people don't use code of code words in order to make shvuas, etc., etc. According to another opinion, Beit Shammai savri gazrin on kinoi kinuyin mishum kinuyin. Sounds like according to this opinion, maybe Beit Shammai would actually agree that kinuyin are not lashon umosein, but kinuyin are actually lashon shabadu chachamim. If they're lashon shabadu chachamim, if it's what the chachamim made, so then now we have the opposite problem. Now Beis Hillel makes more sense. If it's the words that the rabbis made, so then only the words that the rabbi made should work. But if it's the words that the rabbis made, and these are kinoi kinuyin, words that the rabbis didn't make, so why does Beit Shammai say that they're chal? Beit Shammai savi gazrin on kinoi kinuyin mishum kinuyin. He says, well, the rabbis made up these code words. And if we tell you that you can't use the code words, the derivative of the code words, the ones that sound like the code words, then we're afraid that you're going to come and you're going to use the code words and think that the code words aren't chal either. But we know the code words are chal because those are the ones that the rabbis made up. And therefore, we're making a gzeira that the ones that sound like the code words are going to work as well, because we don't want you to mistakenly think that the code words won't work. Which obviously everybody agrees that they work because the rabbis made that up according to this opinion. And the rabbis and the Beis Hillel says that what? He agrees that the kinuyin were made up by the rabbis, but we're not going to make a gzeira and say that the kinuyin, the words that sound like the code words, those are also going to work, because we're not going to make a gzeira of those. The only reason to make those work is because of the gzeira. We're not going to make a gzeira and make those work. We're not worried that if we tell you that you can't use the derivatives, we're not worried that you're not going to actually go ahead and use the derivatives either. If we tell you can't use the derivatives of the derivatives, you'll still know that if you take the derivative, if you use the kinoi, the code word, that it'll actually be chal. Okay. Again, if you're ever tempted to make a kinoi with a code word, you have it. Now, if you want to use the derivative of the code word, not the code word itself, but something that sounds like the code word, so here's what you should say. By NEDARIM, Tani Rav Yosef, Maknamna, Maknachna, Maknasna. Okay, I would probably stick to the code words because this is a little bit too much of a tongue twister, but if this is what does it for you, then you should use the code of the code words. Okay, so maknamna, maknachna, maknasna. Those are the kinoi kinuyin. Those are the derivatives of the code words. Heichidami kinoi kinuyin decherem. Tani mafsha. Mafsha says charakim, charachim, charafim. Again, why are these the code of the code words? So if you look back in the Mishnah for a second, haomer konam, konach, konas. That's a kinoi for a korban. So this is a little bit different. This is maknamna, maknachna, maknasna. And the next one is cherek, cherech, cheref. And this is charakim, charakim, charafim. So again, it sounds like the code word, but it's a derivative of the derivative. Fine. Back to calculus. Kinoi kinuyin de nazirus. So the kinoi v'kinoi by nazirus. Tani Rav Yosef, machazkina, manzachna, mafichna. Okay. Ibayilahu. So they ask a shaila, they interject. Mifchaznamai, mischaznamai, misazamai. I'm not happy with the derivative of the derivative. It's not confusing enough to say machazakna. Is it okay if I say mifchazna, or mischazna, or misazna? So he didn't answer. Amar le Ravina le Ravashi, kinma mai. If he says kinma, so does that work or not? Well, it's not kinwa. No. Okay. Kinwa is, or whatever. Okay, we're not going to talk about the kashrus for Pesach of kinwa right now. Mekanma. So kinma mai. What about kinma? So konem kamar. Is that like saying a konam, which would be good? Or nilma kinmen besem kamar. Or when you say kinma, you're talking about fragrant cinnamon and nothing to do with anything else. Amalei Ravacha Breder Rav Chiel Ravashi kina mai. If you say kina for a neder, if you say the word kina for a neder, does that work or not? So kina shall turn a golden kamar. Maybe talking about a chicken coop. Or dilma lashon de konam, or maybe it's the lashon of konam, and it would work. Tibai, what's tibai? The same thing as teku. Tishbi yitari, it's kusha tzibayos. Okay? If you have a real desire to have to do a konam of a konam, and you want to do this, so then you're better off holding your Yetzer Hara until Tishbi can tell you if you can actually do that. Kinoi kinuyin de shvua hechidami. So what's the kinoi of a shvua? Shvuel, shuvitiel, shikukael. Shvuel, how could Shvuel be a kinoi of a kinoi for a shvuel? How can that be a derivative of a derivative? Shvuel ben Gershom Ashma. Shvuel is the name of Gershom's kid, who's the son of Moshe. Ela Shvuvail. No, it's talking about if you say Shvuvail, if you say Shvutiel, if you say Shkukael, Mao, does that work? So Amar Shmuel, so seemingly again, these are all Tibai, these are all Tekus. Amar Shmuel, Amar Ashifta, if you say Ashifta, Lo Amar Klum. Again, this is going back on the Shvuas. If you look at the Mishnah, which we were talking about, so we're talking about that Kinuyin would be Shvusa, Shkuka, Noder, Bemohi. Those are Kinuyin for the Shvua. So instead of saying Shvusa, you say Ashifta. That's nothing. Ashkika, Lo Amar Klum. Karinsha, or Karinsa, Lo Amar Klum. So those are too far removed from the basic declaration, and therefore they would not work. Neder Bemohi Hare Elu Kinuyin. If you take a neder b'mohi, if you say neder with Moshe, that's considered to be a kinoi, and that works for Shua Tanya, Rashba Gomer, Haomer b'mohi. If you just say b'mohi, b'moshe, without saying neder b'mohi, lo amar klum, that's nothing. You can't just say b'moshe. See, neder b'moshe, that's a shua. B'momasa de amar mohi, with the pledge with the statement that Moshe said. If you say those words, quote, "B'momasa d'amar Moi, harei elu kinuyin l'shua," that would work, and that would be a kinoi for a shua. Wow, we're flying over here. We'll do 2 dapim. Mishnah ha'omer l'chulin she'ochel loch. So what's here? We have something that you have food, and I say to you the following: I want to make that food usher to me. So I don't just want to say that food's usher to me, because that's no fun. So what do I say? Ha'omer l'chulin she'ochel lecha. I say l'chulin, which they explain as being lo chulin. Your food should not be chulin to me. What does that mean? Your food should be hekdesh to me. Should be kodesh. Lo kasher. Your food's not kasher. Lo dachi. Your food's not clean. Tahor. And they explain that means not that it's tahor. Lo tahor. I say your food's not tahor. Tameh. Your food is tameh. Nosar, your food is nosar. Your food is left beyond, right? What's nosar? When you leave a korban beyond the allotted time to eat it, it becomes asur to eat. So your food is to me as nosar would be to me. Upigul. Pigul is that before you actually leave it over, but when you do the actual avoda, when you do the service in the Beis Hamikdash, it's done with the intent that I'm going to eat it past the allotted time. That also disqualifies the korban. So your food should be as a pigul to me, asur. Under all those circumstances, your food is asur to me because I made it asur with one of these statements. Ke'imra, your food should be like a lamb designated as a korban, i.e. a lamb which is designated as a korban. Kedirim, your food should be like the enclosures, which seemingly is the enclosures which lambs or which animals that have been designated as a korban, they wait in the enclosure. Ke'etzim, your food should be like logs of firewood for the mizbeach. Ke'eshim or ke'ishim, your food should be like fire of the mizbeach. Ke'mizbeach, your food should be like the actual mizbeach. Ke'heichal, your food should be like the heichal. Your food should be ki Yerushalayim. And seemingly mizbeach, there's different ways to interpret it, but the most simple understanding is mizbeach, heichal, and Yerushalayim are all built with consecrated funds. So we're saying that all of these things are, your food should be like the logs, like the fire, like the mizbeach, like the heichal, like Yerushalayim, i.e. they should be asur to me. Just like consecrated funds are asur to me. Neder be'echad mikol mishamshem mizbeach, or if you take a neder referencing any of the accessories of the mizbeach, which would seem to be any part of the mizbeach, or anything that's used in conjunction with the korban or the mizbeach, like the knife for the shchita, or the bowl to collect the blood, or the shovels for the ketoras. Alpha pishlo hiska korban. If you don't actually mention a korban and say Raizel korban, Raizel neder bekorban. That's taking a neder like you're saying a neder bekorban. Any of these things would consider it to be a good neder. Rabbi Huda Omer, that it's only if you say ki Yerushalayim, your thing should be like Yerushalayim. Ha'omer Yerushalayim, if you say the food is Yerushalayim, that means nothing. Lo amar klum. But if you say the food is like Yerushalayim, so then it would be asur. Okay.